Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. I'm Jordan Hall, and I'm pumped to be joined by the Flyers pre- and post-game live crew, Ashlyn Sullivan, our pre- and post-game live host, and Joe Fordyce, our pre- and post-game live producer. The Flyers are coming off their second straight loss, the first time they've lost back-to-back games since before the holiday break. A tough one, 4-3 loss to the Kings. They never trailed in that game until the final result. Ashlyn, I'm going to ask you about the big topic off the bat. Was it a penalty on Tony DeAngelo in overtime? What did you guys think?
It was interesting because I was sitting next to Scott and Al when that happened, and Al immediately said yes, and Scott immediately said no. And then we heard a wide range of opinions in our post-game show as well, with Tort saying it was, and then Tony, of course, saying it was. I think the grand scheme of things now, a day removed from it, is I think John Tortorella and Scott as well had a great point that even if it was a penalty for Tony to fall down, and in that moment, that wasn't the move. Regardless of how invasive the penalty was, you have to keep going with the play in case something like that happens. So I'm sure Tony would want that back. And Scott was saying when you're a player, you're always going to think it's a penalty against you, no matter what. It doesn't matter how intense it is. You're always going to be the guy that says, yeah, that happened to me.
That's really great perspective. To the naked eye upstairs where I was in the press box, like right away I thought it was. I thought it was on Copley, the goalie. I thought he tripped him with his stick. And I was like, wow, like how is that not getting called? Saw the replays and I thought it maybe didn't look as egregious on the replay. Joe, what were your thoughts? Did you think initially it was a penalty?
I got to tell you, I think the reason it wasn't called is because Tony oversold it.
Yeah.
If he didn't flail, maybe it gets called. Maybe it doesn't. But I do think there was a bit of dramatics attached to it that was almost motivation to not call it. And that's the way that's why I thought it wasn't called. And, you know, again, regardless of called, not called, unhappy, or, you know, not thinking it's a penalty, you need to continue and get back in the play. Now, you could also argue, and I believe it was Al that said this, was he had been out there for the entire overtime so far. So the chances that he would have gotten back anyway are very slim. But to not make the attempt at all, one is a rough look, and I think that contributed to the way that Torts answered the question. And two, I mean, there's no defense for it. Like, there's no defense for him not continuing in the play because, whether the penalty's called or not, you need to keep playing until the whistle. And that didn't happen. And, of course, you know, as soon as that happens in a 3-on-3, if you take one guy out of the lineup, I mean, you're in a really rough spot. And it didn't take long for them to make the Flyers pay, and particularly because with Tony behind the play, you then have Konechny in the middle, and he's not a defenseman. You can kind of see him get crossed up, and he goes down. And, you know, I'm not saying he doesn't know how to defend a play, but that's not his specialty. So, you know, that it was kind of a perfect mix of bad things for the Flyers that resulted in a loss. But I do think the play was oversold a little bit by Tony. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is too, and you know, there's penalties called in overtime. We see it all the time, but you can't assume penalties are called in overtime like maybe you can assume in the second period or the first period. Things are called a little bit differently, and you always have to be mindful that you can't afford to be behind a player, get taken out of a play when there's only 3 guys on the ice. And all of those things combined to cost the Flyers the game essentially last night.
I thought the play was going to counter regardless, like you mentioned, Joe, because the Flyers were in so deep, and that's just the nature of 3-on-3. When you really go hard on your chance or your 2 chances, if you don't convert, very good chance the play is going to counter the other way. It did. I'm not even sure if Tony DeAngelo could have gotten back. I will say the one thing I liked what Tony DeAngelo had to say was he was very accountable for his second period turnover that led to the game tying goal at 3-3. And I thought that was good. One thing I will say, Tony DeAngelo has been accountable all season. Anytime we've talked to him after a game, practice, whether it was when he got benched, whether he's made a mistake or he wasn't very good, I feel like we've talked to him more times when he's been bad than he's been good, to be quite honest. And he's always been accountable. And he said, for a guy that's expected to move the puck the way I am, I have to get the puck out there. He had that costly turnover that led to the 3-3 goal right after about 8 minutes after Rasmus Ristolainen gave them the lead. And that's a pivotal turn. I mean, the Flyers are kind of in the control there. It's later in the second period, they're up a goal. They have a chance to go into second intermission with a lead. And I think at that point, they could really kind of dictate terms a little bit. Instead, they go into second intermission tied. So I like that DeAngelo was accountable there. Ashlyn, are you more concerned that the Flyers have lost 2 straight games, or maybe more pleased that they've been in these games? 2 games that they've lost, they've scored 3 goals in both of them, and they're in it. They're in it till the end, really.
Yeah, I think it's very much the storyline of the season. I don't think we should be surprised that at some point there was nippy a bump on the road. They had a great streak going of over a month of not losing back-to-back games, but especially when you saw this point in the schedule and you saw the opponents, there was a possibility, right? And I always go back to the big picture in mind, because I think that's kind of drilled in our heads based on every John Tortorella media availability. Is he almost seemed kind of chipper last night in his post-game press conference, because I think he as well sees the big picture that they took a Los Angeles Kings team that's playing really well into overtime. Would you like those to, of course, turn into wins? Yeah, but I think that's the next step, is those close games then results in wins. And you would love these final 2 games before the All-Star break to go out on a high note, but as well, these are pretty tough opponents before this break.
It's funny with John Tortorella, and I've heard that he can be a spin artist. You know, whatever the narrative is, maybe within the fan base or the media coming up after a game, like he's going to be a contrarian. He's going to go the opposite to try to spin things. And kudos to him. I guess he's known for a long time that he can do that. Joe, what did you think? Like, after that game, everyone's probably ticked off about the call, or the no call, excuse me. And they're also like, wow, they gut-wrenching finish. And then here's Tortorella. No, I'm not going to complain about this one. What do you think about Tortorella's tactics and how he felt after that game?
Well, I do feel like that's what he's been doing all year. I mean, if you think about it, last night, everyone's asking, was it a penalty? Wasn't it a penalty? And he, not only does he say it wasn't a penalty, but he essentially blows off the question almost like it wasn't even an issue in the game.
Yeah.
Even though it was the pivotal play in the game. And kind of just doesn't answer it other than to say it wasn't a penalty. And now, there's also the aspect of he can't go on, and torch the referees, because then he'll get fined, and perhaps bring negative attention in future games from the referees. So, but I do think that he's absolutely a spin artist, because I feel like a lot of the storylines we follow are based on things that he says in the press conferences and things that he points out, or that he, no pun intended, retorts with when somebody brings up a topic. He seems to do that all the time. Someone will say, "Oh, what did you think about this? It seemed like this," and he'll kind of throw it back at them, and then that becomes the narrative. And I feel like that's absolutely a tactic of his. But I don't think it's all spin. I do think it's more of, I mean, let's be honest. There is definitely a I'm the hockey coach, you're not sort of tone to a lot of what he does, which is fine. And it's true. But, and you definitely, I feel like you get more of that at the home games, because there's more people there asking questions. And there's more of the sort of like fly-by-night type of guys that are there once every 5-6 games that are asking questions. And maybe he has a little, I don't want to say fun, because it doesn't seem like it's fun for him, but he has a little bit, he kind of takes some liberties with the questions that they ask, as opposed to those who are there every day. And yeah, I mean, makes our job interesting, that's for sure. You know, we was it? Yeah, it was 2 games ago when he he basically didn't answer a question, said stop asking questions you know the answer to, and kind of just walked off the podium. And, you know, for him literally saying nothing, it was pretty entertaining. And, you know, we knew what we were getting when this guy got hired. And I think he's definitely lived up to that.
Very much balances the highs and lows, like he said before with his team. That's his job. They want to win a game, but at the same time, he needs to understand not letting guys get too high, not letting guys get too low, focusing on the big picture with confidence and mentality and all that. And yeah, last game, 2 games ago, I mean, he was pretty snippy at Joe, as you alluded to. And, you know, they gave up 3 goals in the first period. It was a pretty dreadful first period. And he comes down and he says, I thought it was pretty good. I'm like, John, no, you guys gave up 3 goals. You guys fell behind in the first period, 3-0 in like the first 8 minutes. It wasn't good. But I understand what he's kind of doing. Maybe he's, one, very, very much being honest. Probably felt it wasn't as bad as it looked. And then 2, trying to spin things a little bit, keep his guys, you know, level and not sinking too low. And probably wanted to highlight the positives there. Hey, we came back, made it a game. Flyers Talk is brought to you by Great Railing. Stop into Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices on all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. Well, the Flyers have 2 road games to finish up before the extended break, which includes the All-Star break. Ashlyn, what would be a realistic expectation here for these 2 road games in your mind? What would you like to see from the Flyers against the Wild, and then a rematch with that really good Jets team?
Yeah, I think my eyes are all on that last game, that Saturday game against the Jets. I think to get revenge basically a week later would be huge. And I know they're 2 tough opponents, but especially to go into that break on a high note, knowing you just lost to this team, knowing for a good bit of that game, it was really the Flyers shooting themselves in the foot. 3 of those goals came from misplays by the Flyers against the Jets. You got to think it's a totally different game if that doesn't happen. So I would like to see them fix mistakes quickly, get a win over the Jets. That Wild game on Thursday is a totally different topic, but I think if you can win at least one of these last 2, and especially that Saturday game where you can go in with some momentum into the break, I think that would be huge.
Yeah, that game against the Jets has my eyes too, Ashlyn, because you want to see them respond to what happened in Philadelphia a couple, 3-4 days ago. I think that could be a real barometer type of game for them. I agree. And I think they need to tighten things up defensively. It's nice they're scoring goals, but they've kind of lost their way in terms of John Tortorella wanting them to really be hard to play against and not have teams come down and just work them in the offensive zone. I think we've seen that far too often. It's just not it's not a Tortorella trademark. And their record is 17-5-5 when they score 3 or more goals. They've lost the last 2 games when they've scored 3 goals at home. I feel like those are games they should win at least one of them. So that would be something I think they need to show, is get back to that Tortorella way of playing, hard to play against, make it those low scoring, grinded out games. They're not always pretty, but I think that tells me they're playing a little bit more the way Tortorella wants to play. Joe, how about you? What are you looking for in these 2 games before they go away for about 8 days?
Well, we had talked about 2 out of 3 would be the ideal.
Yeah.
But now we're talking about 2 straight. Might be a little much to ask. So I think if you get one of them, regardless of which one, that you're okay. Now, the Jets one, as Ashlyn mentioned, would be a little more advantageous because you can take that into the break, and you're not playing for, 9 days or so. So I think that would be better for them to win that one. I mean, of course, winning 2 would be the best case scenario. But it is a tough pair of road games to go into the break. What you don't want to see is the last time they had a pair of tough road games going into a break was right before Christmas, and they got beat in Toronto and Carolina. And outside of a stretch of the end of that Toronto game, they weren't really in either of those games. So I think that's what they don't want to see. Because those up until last night, those were the last two times that they lost the back-to-back games. And they get dominated for a lot of that Toronto game. And, they really weren't in the game against Carolina, and you don't want to see that. So I think that would be your biggest thing would be to not get dominated in those games, to not get beat thoroughly, be in the games, hopefully win one of them, ideally win both of them. So that would be the way I would look at it.
Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanizes the disease of addiction. Download the new Season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. So with the All-Star break coming up next week, Kevin Hayes obviously will be the Flyers representative, and a break here for the Flyers, a long break. We're going to look at maybe something that needs to change for the Flyers post All-Star break over this stretch of games here coming up. Could the Flyers make it interesting? We'll see in terms of playoff race and contention and all that fun stuff. With the big picture in mind, Ashlyn, if there's one thing you maybe want to see change from the Flyers, a storyline to develop over the post All-Star break stretch, what would it be?
I think especially on our pregame shows, myself, Scott, and I, we talk a lot about the progress of Joel Farabee. And I've heard so much about this player when I first started with the Flyers and the potential he had. He was coming off a major surgery. And to me, it seemed like this entire year was the question mark of how he would respond. And I think, especially talking with Al expected by this point of the season, him really to be in an upward trend and for us to see the potential of this player. And since I've been here, it has been a little bit of a roller coaster of up and downs. And at some point of the season, 3-game stretch, you can't take your eyes off him. And then there's some points where we don't even mention his name in post-game show. So I think for a young player like that it seems like this franchise has so many eyes on, I think if you can get more consistency out of him this second half of the season, that would be huge to make everyone feel a little better about this player.
Yeah, that especially given he's just starting this new deal here, this big contract extension that he signed. And in that shortened season, the 56-game year in 2020-21, he led the Flyers in goals that season. And Joe, I think you would agree with me. I thought they had a lot more talent on that team. That was a disappointing year, but they had some faces, some veteran guys that I don't think anyone expected Farabee to lead them in goals. This year, he's not really up there in terms of leading the team in goals or points. And I think a lot of people thought he'd be there. Would you agree, Joe?
Oh, I think not only did we think he'd be there, we talked in the offseason about them relying on him to be that goal scorer and to be that person because of the lack of talent elsewhere on the team. And now Travis Konechny's done a good bit in picking up some of the slack, Owen Tippett, a few guys like that. But the fact doesn't change that the Flyers need more from Joel Farabee. And, it's really been we heard well over a month ago now, I think, Tortorella saying that he does not want Joel Farabee using the injury as an excuse. So that tells me the coach sees that the injury shouldn't be hindering Farabee's play, but something is, because this is a different player than the one we've seen in previous seasons. So how does he get back to that? I'm not sure. And also, he's still a young player. So, guys go through, the term is usually sophomore slump. That wouldn't apply to Farabee, but maybe he's having it a little further down the line. And that was his first major injury. So, it could be a hesitancy, sort of a hangover effect that guys have when they come back from injuries. It could be all of those things, but definitely the Flyers are expecting more and need more from Farabee, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And Joe, for you, post All-Star break storyline that maybe you want to see develop here, in your eyes, what would it be?
I feel like in recent games, some of the aggressiveness offensively has taken a step back, and I'd like to just see them go for it a little more. You have the players to do it. And when I say that, I mean, you have defensemen that can push the offense, as well as some of the forwards who sort of have I don't want to say come out of their shell because I don't know we knew any of them were in a shell, but Frost is a guy that comes to mind, and Tippett. These are guys that they seem to be on fire scoring, and then kind of not so much recently, and they've taken a step back. So I'd like that to see that go back to what it was, because as much as I would have said it before the season was not going to be the case, them having to win in a defensive style, I feel like when this team is playing better now is when they're scoring a lot of goals. So I don't think before the season we would have said outscoring teams is going to be the recipe for this team to win. But I think in the last month, they've shown that is the recipe for them to win. And the defensive style on the hanging back is kind of put them in positions in games where one mistake costs them the game. And I don't think that's a good place for this team to be going forward. So I would say to keep pushing it and kind of ratchet up the aggressiveness offensively would be my thing that I want to see go back to the way it was, say, 2-3 weeks ago. And, you know, the way they play on the penalty kill, and we did a little breakdown of it yesterday, is kind of the way I would like to see them approach 5-on-5. Is they're always looking for it's almost like being cautiously opportunistic. You know, keep your responsibility, but always be looking for that opportunity to break, like they do on shorthanded situations, to do that regularly and really be ready to push the offense, ready and willing to push the offense when the opportunity is presented.
It's been refreshing and fun to watch the penalty kill. It's not always fun to watch a team kill penalties, but it's not going to be perfect with the Flyers right now. But at least like they're really entertaining, and that they can counter quickly within the blink of an eye. And that's really fun, I think, in my mind, where hey, this team could score a goal or take it the other way, shorthanded. That's been fun for me. I'm really going to have my eyes on the young players. Like, I think that will be one of the more telling things going through the all season is how do these young players finish? A lot of them have not played a full NHL season yet. Morgan Frost, Owen Tippett, Noah Cates, Cam York. These guys have not played full seasons, close to 80-something games in 1 year. And how do their bodies hold up? How, do they plateau? Do they plummet? Do they actually kind of rise? I think all of that will be worth watching. I think it'll be really worth watching how Owen Tippett and Morgan Frost fare if James Van Riemsdyk is traded at the deadline, which I think we all believe is a very strong possibility. He will not be here come March on. So how do those two players fare without a veteran on their line? Can Cam York show a little bit more offensively, be more of a difference maker in that way? So that will be things that I'm keeping an eye on. How do these kids finish up in a full season, and how do they take that into the off season? I think will all be things I'm watching closely for sure. Well, guys, this was fun. Excuse me. We'll have 2 more games coming up here on the road. Thursday night's game is not on NBC Sports Philadelphia, so I hope you guys can maybe enjoy a little bit and watch at your own leisure. And then Saturday will be on NBC Sports Philadelphia. You can catch pre- and post-game live with our very own Ashlyn Sullivan and produced by our very own Joe Fordyce. Guys, thank you so much. Great seeing you. Great chatting with you. Can't wait to see you guys again, and we'll have plenty more to cover as we get here into the All-Star break. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru, and Flyers fans, of course, as always. Thank you for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.